Yep.
Good evening and welcome to the, whoa.
Audio.
Yeah. Surround sound.
Special effects are included.
It's really why we come.
Yeah. Okay, somebody say hello.
Hello.
I'm here, not gonna be you.
No
Did you
echo.
not? Awesome. All right, let's try it again. Good evening and welcome to the Lawrence Douglas County Planning Commission. This is our meeting for Wednesday, May 27th, 2026. At this point, I will turn it over to Drew for the rules of the road.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. Please silence your cell phones to minimize distractions during the meeting. When the Chair calls for public comment, please approach the podium to indicate you wish to speak. Virtual participants should use the raise hand function to indicate they wish to speak during public comment. Once your name is called, please unmute and turn on your camera to provide your comments. Please state your name before speaking. The city reserves the right to turn videos off or mute participants, and all comments will be limited to 3 minutes. The primary format to access and participate in this meeting is in person at City Hall. Virtual access to view or participate in the meeting cannot be guaranteed. The chat function will not be monitored. If you have any trouble, the meeting can be viewed on the city's YouTube channel and cable channel 25. And I will pass it back to the Chair.
Thank you very much. At this point, we will move into the minutes from last month. So we will receive and take any amendments and then hopefully approve the Planning Commission minutes from April 22nd, 2026.
I would move that we approve the minutes from April 22, 2026.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Been moved in second. All those, any discussion? All those in favor? Say aye. Raise your hand.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
That was gone.
Okay, one abstention. Did you note that? Great, thank you. All right, motion passes. Thank you very much. We'll now receive reports from committees that have met over the past month. Is there any report from the Lawrence Douglas County Metropolitan Planning Organization Policy Board?
There is not.
All right, thank you, Charlie.
Charlie?
Is there any report from the North Lawrence Comprehensive Corridor Study?
No, there is not.
Okay. At this time, then, we will turn to communications. Is there any written communications from the public?
We did include one general comment that we received, so that's been included through a link in your packet. But all other communication that we received by the deadline has been included in your packet.
Excellent. And with the communication that has been included in the packet, would that be in the packet that went to the public?
Yes.
It was in time for, okay.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. Any written communications from staff, planning commissioners, or other commissioners?
No, none this evening.
Any written action of any waiver requests or determinations made by the city engineer?
No, none this evening.
Any disclosure of ex parte communications among any of the commissioners? Don't see any. All right. Any declaration of abstentions from any specific item on the agenda by any commissioners? Don't see any. And this is the time where we will turn to general public comment. If there's anyone here from the public who wants to speak to the commission on an item that is not on tonight's agenda, now is the time to do so. Please come up to the podium, state your name, and you will have 3 minutes to address the commission. Nope. Okay, great. Yes.
Good evening, Commission. My name is Dominique, and I have spoken here before against the new Boston Crossing, which was in October. I want to say congratulations, Commissioner Eldridge, for your reappointment. I'm glad that the city did approve that. I am unfortunately disappointed that Commissioner and Chair Hayden, that the county did not reappoint you. So I just wanted to say that. I hope that I know tonight's agenda is really small and it's not going to be very intensive and it's going to be pretty procedural, but in the future I do know we're going to have very large discussions in the future. We're going to have the annexation of the 650 acres to the west. We're going to have the new Boston Crossing, now known as 1059, come up again for rezoning and for platting before the commission. And so from my perspective, I felt like in October I was really disappointed by the lack of the total commission's input. There was a couple key players, and Commissioner Rexroad, you were one of the key players, Commissioner Hayden and Commissioner Eldridge. Commissioner Thomas, I believe, had a couple comments, and then I didn't feel like some of the other commissioners had as much engagement as I wish I would have had, because I don't know the commissioners, and I want to hear your thoughts and your opinions on why you would have chose one way or another. So I'm just hoping as we go forward with these like very large items that are probably going to be contentious for different reasons, we'll have good discussion, just so members of the public, again, I'm kind of like the only one here, but I'm interested in these processes. You know, we don't have a lot of turnout at the Planning Commission, but I'm interested in these processes. I'm interested in understanding what the commissioners are doing beyond, you know, looking at voting records, or sometimes I'll go back and watch meetings and I'll hear people talk and comment. But just going forward, I would appreciate there be, you know, a lot of discussion in a way that it gives insight to the public to understand like how these decisions are made, because sometimes it's hard to get through the weeds. You guys have to look at a lot of technical things, right? You have to look at the technicalities of the plat. You have to look at if it hits all these requirements, and you have to look at all this and all that, and it gets really boring and nobody likes it, but maybe people do like it. But it does give me insight to understand how everybody is juggling kind of like the totality of development in Lawrence and what we want to see going forward. So I'm just looking forward to that sort of conversation. And again, I had emailed the commissioners afterwards, and I got some responses from some folks, and I got no responses from others. And I just want to try to understand how are some of the commissioners making the decisions that they're making, and what are the prioritizations? Not to co-opt County Commissioner Kelly's like little juggling act that he likes to say, but like how are we balancing the priorities of the comprehensive plan? How are we balancing the priorities of development and rezoning in the town? So anyways, thank you.
Any other public comment this evening? Is there anyone online? Sure. I don't see anyone online. All right, so we will turn to our regular agenda items. It's a short agenda tonight. We only have 2 items. We'll turn to the first item, which is to consider approving a request to rezone. It looks like, Drew, you are going to be the planner on this.
Yes. Let me share my screen. I have a short PowerPoint. Okay, so yes, this is a rezoning. It is a rezoning for approximately 5.31 acres from the P2 open space district to the R2, which is the residential low density 2 district. This is located east of 1760 East 1100 Road. So some context for this, this is a location map. The address that I provided is that house just to the west of the blue square. This is part of the Hunters Hill subdivision, a major subdivision that was heard by Planning Commission in March. So some key points on this project, the rezoning specifically, is to facilitate the development of that major subdivision with Hunters Hill. The preliminary plat was reviewed and approved by Planning Commission on March 25th of this year. There was a condition recommended by staff and ultimately carried forward that the preliminary plat, that the final plat could not be approved prior to the rezoning that is before you tonight. The preliminary plat calculated the subject area that's being rezoned into its required protection of sensitive lands. That's why it ultimately needs to be rezoned to R2, which is what the rest of the zoning district for this subdivision is. The protection of sensitive lands must be done in a residential zoning district rather than an open space district. That's why you're seeing this. The plat designates this specific area as a tract for the protection of sensitive lands, and thus no development will be able to occur on this area. So I'll quickly run through the rezoning criteria. The first talks about the conformance with the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan does talk about providing housing and protections of sensitive lands. This rezoning seeks both of those. Next is the zoning and use of nearby properties. This This use and zoning will fit the nearby area. There is, I'll show a zoning map here in just a second, but there is R2 zoning existing to the southeast, and then it's more dense R3 zoning directly to the south of this subject area. Next is the character of the neighborhood. Most of the neighborhood is residential and low density residential uses. So this use and density does fit in this area. Next is the plans for the area or neighborhood. This area is part of the K10 and Farmers Turnpike area plan. It does suggest low density residential here, so that does suit what is being proposed. Next is the suitability of the subject property. This property does have sensitive lands, but since they are being protected, it does satisfy this requirement. So here are some maps just for some context. So this is the nearby zoning. The light blue kind of box is the subject area to be rezoned. To the north is P1 civic and institutional use. And then to the south, that kind of red hatched with green under it is open space district. So that part is going to remain there as P2. And then to the east is the R2 in yellow. That is part of that Hunters Hill subdivision. It's not changing with this. And then to the west and south, it's kind of hard to see, but there's green hatching. That's county zoning. It's the cluster preservation zoning. That's kind of their single family residential zoning. And then for land use, it looks pretty similar. The gray around the blue is vacant land. And then to the west, yellow is residential. And then green to the south is open space. So the remaining criteria, we look at the length of time the subject property has been zoned, vacant as zoned. This property has been vacant for its entirety. Then the extent to which approving the rezoning will detrimentally affect property owners. Staff has found that there would be no detrimental effects to the neighbors for approving this zoning. And then the gain, if any, to public health, safety, and welfare due to the denial of the application. Again, staff does not anticipate any gain for the denial of this project. So now we move on to the staff recommendation, which staff is recommending approval and then forwarding the rezoning request Z260033 to the City Commission with a recommendation of approval based on the findings presented in the staff report. These are the kind of, the overview of the rezoning criteria. Again, I'm happy to kind of elaborate on any of them if you need me to. And that's all I had for a staff presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew. Is the applicant here and present?
I don't see them in the room. I don't know if they're online.
Not seeing them online.
Okay. Then at this time, we'll turn to public comment. Is there anyone here to speak on this item tonight?
I have a question.
If you'd like to speak on this item, you can take the podium and feel free to give public comment. You can ask questions, but the commission is not in a position to answer the question immediately. Like, you can ask a question, and as we make discussion, that question might help inform the discussion. But just so you know, if you're going to ask a question, there won't be an immediate answer.
Okay. So I want to put on the table my assumptions here, because I believe the information that comes from people who know very little about what you do is as beneficial, if not more, than the people who do know what you're doing, because the people who don't know what you guys are doing are the larger mass of people in this town than the people who don't. Than the people who do know what you're doing. So I feel like that's valuable information. So I'm going to try and I'm really motivated by that person's energy. I want to create some, I want to see how I can explain what is happening here to other people so I can help other people understand.
So at this point, we need to have a question or a comment on this item. So I don't want to interrupt you, but just make sure that you're addressing this item.
So what are the long-term implications behind changing this zoning rule?
Is that your question?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Like I said, no one can answer the question at the moment, so you can continue. You have 3 minutes, and you can ask as many questions as you'd like. You have 3 minutes, but this isn't a back and forth session. This is your opportunity to provide public comment.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that more preface. So I want to, personally, as someone who does not understand what happens, I want to also understand the priorities. I like their idea of like the priorities of the commissioners, and I'm really curious as to, and I know you can't answer now, why it has to move from R2 to, why it has to be R2 instead of P2. And I'm curious as to who or what institution has what to gain from making this very minute change. And I know this question might be glossed over later, but it's like questions that you wouldn't even consider to have because you're so knowing are the questions that are somehow easier to break down in logic. So, as you can see, I was not as prepared as I thought I was.
Okay, the
So
3 minutes are yours to do
As
what you want
someone,
with.
thank you. As someone with a lot of assumptions about bureaucracy, my immediate reaction, also as an individual who has not commonly sought out the information or function of zoning, I have an inherently negative bias as to the function of zoning, as to, in my, at least this is a comment on my sphere of values, there is not negative commentary, but not positive commentary
Relating to this item?
relating to the function of zoning in of itself.
Okay.
Within the contents of Lawrence.
Okay, so at this moment, we need to focus on this item that's before us. So if you're done talking about this item, then perhaps you would come back at another meeting at another time and address those issues with general comment, general public comment.
Thank you.
Yes. Is there anyone else here to speak on this item tonight?
Specifically about the rezoning, yes. This is confusing, and from what I understand, and this can be clarified later, but we need to rezone this from open space to R2 because there is a caveat that there is sensitive land that needs to be fulfilled under a residential development. So a certain percentage can be maximized to set aside for specific sensitive land and the steep slopes in this areas. That's what I understand, but I still, and I'm not expecting you guys to take my point of view here. I'm throwing a pitch to the wind, but I think it is important for us to look at the ideology of turning an open space zoning into a less protected zoning. I understand that the whole point of this is that this meets a criteria for residential development. The developer gets to have their sensitive land, the city gets to have the sensitive land, and the developer gets to have more lots. I would ask how many lots are gained by this rezoning. I understand this process was really complicated because the plat was approved before the rezoning happened. That's a little frustrating in my mind because it makes this rezoning inevitable, right? So there's no, if you deny this rezoning, you deny the plat, and then we have to go back to square one. And it seems frustrating, and I understand there was probably just some timing issue that happened when it got submitted, when it got reviewed, and everything of that nature, but it is frustrating that this doesn't get to be looked at in the same way that the zoning did to begin with. It has an inherent bias to approve this project, which again, I'm expecting to go through. But when we take open space, which is the most protected for environmentally sensitive lands, that zoning does not allow anything to be developed on. It allows passive recreation and maybe one or two other like parks, things that are very passive, but it does not allow housing. We can say at this time, we're actually protecting the sensitive lands, but we have no guarantee in the future that this is actually going to happen, right? Unless there's an easement, and there probably is, and I trust the staff's judgment, but I'm talking more about like the ideology, right? We're going from open space to less protected. And we can have caveats. I appreciate that we could do this in the reverse. If we're taking not open space zoned areas and we can put conservation easements or we can put protections for sensitive lands, I fully appreciate that. And I think it's very smart, and I think it's very, it's just a very smart way to go about protecting things that otherwise might not be protected, right? So I appreciate that, but the conversion from going open space to less protected makes me feel the opposite way. Again, it's not about this project necessarily, but it is about the conversion of open space as a protected zoning district to a less protected zoning district. So I understand what happened. I understand this was very confusing and things like this happen. But I have to make my pitch to say, please don't do this, because open space is actually a more protected zoning, but I understand the reasons why. Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. Samuel Carter, 66046. And I guess my only question is if we are monitoring the kind of proportion of growth in our different tiers, our growth boundaries, right? We have tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. I don't know. Maybe that was already addressed. I stepped in a little late. You'll have to forgive me. So I'm sorry. But yeah, no, I think there's just a really strong desire to, I think it's evidenced by some of what we heard tonight, but also I think over a long time to have more growth in our tier 1 areas. I'm just wondering if we are actually monitoring what the applications are, what the building permits are for, and see if we are kind of realizing those ideals. That was my only question. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone, there's no one else here present, so is there anyone online that is here to give public comment on this item? All right.
I do not see any.
I don't see anyone either. The applicant isn't here for a response, so we will bring it back to the commission for discussion. I turn it over to the commission.
So just a thought, I remember talking about this space and that this was going to be coming back to us when we looked at the larger Hunter Hill project, and I'm still supportive of it just as I was then. I have to say, though, that's just, you made a comment in the staff reports that it seems incongruent. Yes, it really does. It's confusing to me why we would want to change this thing that we want to be open space to a residential zoning. And I know that we're not going to solve that code problem here, but I sure hope you can tell me that this is on a list of things to maybe clean up or clear up.
Yes, it's part of our cleanup text amendment. So basically this stems from language in that protection of open space where that requirement is in the land development code. It specifically calls out residential zoning. So in that aspect, all of the protected areas need to be in a residential area. I think the thought process was you're going to have this big residential area all under the common zoning. You're going to section off areas for protection, and then you're good to go. Whereas with this one, it's all under common ownership. The zoning lines don't follow property boundaries. So essentially, it's part of this parcel, and so they're basically pulling it in with their residential zoning to use it as that open space and the protection. So that's kind of where it stems from. And we are trying to, wordsmith language to where we could include open space zoning. So an applicant could propose zoning their protected areas as open space in the future.
Okay.
And just as a reminder too, that these applications are a little bit they came to you a little bit out of sync. We had the rezoning application in process when the plat was going through its approval process. So we knew that this residential zoning application was something that was going to come before you. And that's one of the reasons why it was counted as part of the area included in that protection calculation.
That was coming.
Yeah.
We just do so much layers on time and process and cost onto housing, and I just hope that we're doing every single thing we can to streamline and make this easier. Thank you.
Does that mean, Drew, that when the wording of the LDC gets fixed, that this property owner will have to come back in order to get the open space zoning?
I don't think so. I think it would be more, we'll just add it as an option. So they could do it under residential zoning, or they could rezone it, or if there is nearby existing open space. So I think it's just trying to find ways that this could land either under residential zoning district, and it would need to be designated as a tract with protections on the sensitive lands, or rezoned as open space. We would probably still want it to be put in a tract, just because that's kind of a stronger catch than just zoning. So with that tract, since it would be platted as protected land, they would have to replat to remove that condition, and staff ultimately would, trace the thread back and find it, oh, this was part of a major subdivision for their open space. They can't get rid of that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was really good clarification. Thank you for that. That helped.
Yeah.
Good question.
I had a question. So just thinking this through, I kind of see it with this project, kind of what happened. And I hear like an idea that we may need to look at how this comes about, and the idea of inserting an or, like, so it could be a part of the residential neighborhood or an open space already. It also strikes me that is part of the reason perhaps that we have it as currently written is to get additional protection. So we have sensitive lands that we have decided should be open space and whatnot. And then there's also other things in which when you're creating a planned community or a development, we're wanting developers to include open space within what is already zoned as residential and what they would normally build out as residential. But we're wanting to, the reason for having this language would be that we're wanting that to also have protection. So I guess just going forward, I would be really careful about how one modifies, because you might actually be changing the intent. And in fact, I'll probably will be voting against this because it seems to me to be the opposite. I get kind of with this, it was all odd. But it doesn't really matter about necessarily the way that it comes through, in the sense that my reading of it is that within what is zoned residential, there should be some open space when we're doing projects like this. And that what we've already designated as open space isn't just a substitute for that. Any other discussion on this project?
I'd make a motion.
I would like to say thank you to staff for clarifying, as what Commissioner Rexroad said. This is a confusing one. If you read it just as it comes down the line, it's like you're going, how could that possibly be more restrictive if we're going to go from this to this? But thank you for the explanations.
You're welcome.
And I think that actually it kind of does create an idea of, just so that the public knows kind of what we're talking about. We're talking about is that we are changing something that is protected from open space to something that would have a residential zoning, meaning it could now be developed. However, what you were talking about with the tracing it back is that if any project was to come around for that, they would see that this particular residentially zoned community has that as open space, and because of the internal documents of that organization or of that community, it has to stay open space. So the protection's not actually being removed, but in the future, if there were to be a project like this that came up, that could be a concern of changing zoning like this.
Yes.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Drew, I also want to thank you for spotting the problem so that we can deal with it now, but deal with it in the future as well.
That was part of the reason why this came flip-flopped, was because during the major subdivision process, we realized, oh, hey, you need to pull in that area. And so the applicant was more than willing to do so. And they just said, make it as a condition, that's totally fine. So we can, get them through the process. So
I appreciate what the applicant has done as well.
Sure.
I'm sure we'll have other things like this with the land development code that we'll want to fix as we go along, and I think that's reasonable. Thank you.
You make a motion?
All right. Is there a second? All right, sorry, make your motion. I'm not excited.
To approve the request to rezone Z-26-0033, approximately 5.3 acres, located east of 1760 East 1100 Road, from P2 district to R2 district, based on the findings presented in the staff report.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
All right. Any further discussion?
Do we need to include in that motion that we make the recommendation to the planning commission, to the city commission, that they also approve this, since they're the...
My only thought, we could ask Randy for sure, my only thought would be that that's not a question that's specific to this motion. I wouldn't accept that as a friendly amendment to it. It's not specific to this motion. It is something we want to do, but it's not something that would be conditional here.
As Drew introduced it, I thought we had both things that we were to consider. So that's...
It would just be the recommending approval to the city commission.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, what my motion has done.
I think we're fine either way. If you wanted to do a friendly amendment just for that clarification, I think that'd be okay.
My preference, I think, would be to keep this independent of any thing that might need to be done in the land development code, and treat that as a separate question.
No, the question was approval recommend that the city commission approve it. That's all I'm saying.
Oh, I see. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's fine. I thought that was next. I'm absolutely fine with that friendly amendment.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I thought you were talking about goofing with the text.
No.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Was there other discussion? Did somebody? All right, so there is a motion with a friendly amendment. Does the second also accept the friendly amendment? All right, so we have a pending motion. Is there any further discussion on the pending motion? All right, all those in favor, raise your hand. Any opposed? Motion passes. Any abstentions? I think everyone raised their hands. Motion passes. All right, we'll move to our next item, which is to consider approving a text amendment. Leanne? Lynn? Sorry. Lynn, I'm not sure I've had the opportunity to meet you. Nice to meet you.
I always bring fun with me, so get excited.
Oh, we can't wait.
This is a text amendment for changes that are being proposed to the 8th and Penn redevelopment design guidelines to allow for a project that is moving forward through the approval process right now. It's a combination project. It has LIHTC credits. It has city funding from our affordable housing. And we've been working on this particular project for about 4 years now, trying to get everything in alignment. And when the pro forma came back on how it could actually come to fruition, there were a couple of things in the design guidelines that would have limited the development so that it couldn't meet those qualifications in the pro forma. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But this, the first thing I always bring with these, because they're a little unique, is why on earth is this a text amendment? And it's because when we adopt an overlay zoning, particularly an urban conservation overlay district, it has with it design standards. And those design standards get incorporated by reference into the land development code. And so if we're going to amend those design guidelines, it requires a text amendment to get the new design guidelines, if they're changed, incorporated into the land development code. So just to give you a little background, on the left you'll see the city boundaries, and the area we're talking about is this little red dot right here. It is the 8th and Pennsylvania Redevelopment District. A lot of people call it the Lawrence Art District, or most people are familiar with the Polar Building and some of the things, Lawrence Beer Company, all those wonderful things that have taken place over the last few years with the redevelopment of this area. Just a little bit of background. When we did the overlay district back in 2006, there was a specific developer who hired a specific group to come up with the overlay and the design guidelines based on his plan and his development. We had extensive public engagement. We had design charrettes. We had multiple meetings with the neighborhood. And so it really was a community effort to come up with the design guidelines for this area, which I know you've been there, and it's very unique. It is what is left of our historic industrial district. Once it moved from downtown at the riverfront, it moved over to the Pennsylvania and Delaware area. That development never came through fruition, but the overlay was there and the design guidelines were there. A few properties developed using those guidelines, but then as early as 2011, a developer came forward and finally figured out how to make a rehabilitation of the historic Polar Building possible. But it was not allowed under the guidelines. So that was our first amendment to the guidelines, was to lift the density cap for the Polar building so that they could make the project work. And it was an affordable housing project as well. Huge success. The neighborhood really took off. And then in 2020, the same developer purchased some vacant property in the district and wanted to do another affordable housing project. Again, there were constraints in the design guidelines that would not allow him to maximize enough density and height to make that project work. And so the guidelines were amended at that time in 2020 to allow for this specific project to have kind of exemptions because it had the affordable housing component. So now here we are in 2026, there's another vacant lot, and the developer has again put together a great package to get us some of the affordable housing we desperately need in Lawrence, in a location where it's walkable, it's close to downtown, it's very vibrant, there are restaurants and businesses, lots of artists in the area. The ground floor would be work-live units, so artists could be there and have a workspace in the front. If you're familiar, the one at 8th in Pennsylvania actually has, it's not really a restaurant, but it's kind of a wine tasting where you go in and learn about wine tasting and pairing. So it's to encourage those types of what we call kind of pop-up businesses that, you know, they don't need a big standalone building, but it works really great when you increase the density in these areas and have those small business opportunities. So the property that we're talking about tonight is in Zone 1, which is the National Register Historic District. And the proposed project that is moving forward right now, and it does have LIHTC funding and it does have city funding from our Affordable Housing Trust Fund, is the building that's shown on your right. The challenge is that the building is too tall, according to the guidelines, and the density is too great. And so the applicant has submitting a proposed amendment to the guidelines to amend the building height section in the guidelines and the density section. And what their proposed amendment was very similar to the last one that was done, and it tied together this amendment with this specific project so that in order for anybody else to take advantage of it, it wouldn't work. It would only work for this specific project. And so when staff received their request, which was to allow a 4-story building and 52 feet and a maximum density of 84 dwelling units per acre, we went back to the drawing board and said, okay, do we always want to be amending the guidelines which were developed with the community for the overall area for specific projects? And if affordable housing is important to us, we need to weigh that too. So what are our options? What can we do so that we're not making these guidelines specific parcel by parcel or lot by lot? Originally in the guidelines, the building height was set to make sure that the Polar building was the focal point of the district. It's one of the most incredible buildings we have historically for our industrial heritage that's still standing. It's brick, it's a wonderful building, and so when we went through that whole process with the design guidelines, that came out clearly with the neighborhood, that the overall goal is to protect the Polar building, find a new use for it, and have it maintain that visual dominance for the neighborhood. At the same time, there was a recognition that the density that was going to need to be available for this overlay district was not allowed by the current land development code. And so the height was an issue, the parking was an issue. They looked at doing a planned development and it had restrictions that wouldn't work for this area. So that the developer at that time came up with this idea, okay, we can put the height restrictions and the density restrictions and the parking, and we can put it all in this great overlay that's just specific to this small area. And that way we can adjust things so that we can get this infill development that protects historic character, but at the same time allows increase in density, looks at shared parking, which nobody was really thinking about at the time. And of course, now we have a great new land development code that really addresses a lot of the things that this group was struggling with in 2006 when they were trying to make it work. So currently, the building height restrictions for the entire district are 3 stories and 40 feet. There was an exception made at 8th and Pennsylvania Street on that southwest corner for a structure that's there now, for a portion of it to be 4 stories and taller than the 40 feet. The applicant is proposing, again, to have 4 stories and 52 feet. So that's a 12-foot difference, basically, in the height. And then there's some analysis in your staff report that talks about the height of the Polar building and kind of where this fits into that. As far as the density is concerned, the overall density for the residential uses in the district was proposed at 32 units per acre. The proposal that's before you this evening, based on the structure that's moving through the process, is 84 units per acre, which is not allowed in any of our zoning districts at the time, but now we have the R5. And so if you were doing this under today's code, you would have the ability to reach that 84 units per acre if you rezone to R5. So what staff did is the first thing we looked at was the height, and the different zones are shown on the left-hand side of your map in the overlay. Zone 1 is here in the dark blue, and that's the National Register of Historic Places district. The property that we're talking about is actually here in this corner, and so it is in that National Register of Historic Places district. So when we looked at the base zoning and then we looked at what the overlay would allow as far as height, it was clear that the base zoning would allow a lot of additional height that is currently curtailed by the overlay district. And so if the point of the overlay district is still to protect the historic Polar building and make it the focal point, then you wouldn't want to have that height in the AG at 75 feet when the Polar building is back down in the 50s. So staff looked at all the property that is in the overlay district, and what you see in the red circles are what's left in the district that could potentially be developed without demolition to combine lots for greater projects. So there really aren't that many. When you look at this, there's some red circles and you're like, well, that's a lot. But when you are realistic about it, unless, and probably not for the next 20 to 30 years, we're not going to be getting rid of this parking lot and this parking lot simply because they do support the district. They support the residential and the Polar building and at 8th and Penn, as well as the restaurants and other residential that's along Pennsylvania Street. And so we were looking at height and saying, okay, well, you know, are we looking at this realistically? Could it go up some and not hurt the polar building's dominance for the overlay? Or are we at that sweet spot right now, or is there something in between? And so the line of sight on the top of the page, over here on the left is what's called the wish. That's the new development that they're proposing. And then on the right of this line is the Polar building. This is the Lawrence Beer Company, so it's pushed back. It's along Pennsylvania Street, but it's just there so you can kind of see what that height progression is. And if you notice with the proposed height of the new structure, there is just really visually, if you're on the ground or at the corners, you're just not going to see a lot of difference in the height in the Polar building and the one that's being proposed. It really does look, because of its street face mass and height, very similar in size to the Polar building. On the bottom, you have the site section that was done when they proposed and built the building at 8th and Pennsylvania Street. And this is that structure here that's now constructed with the top height, this line right here at about 48 feet, if I can read that correctly. And so then you have where the parking lot, and then where Bon is, and then you have the Polar building, which is at 55. And so when you look at this, just in a layout of a street view, even though that structure that's at 8th and Pennsylvania is fairly large, if you've had a chance to get over there, the Polar building is still dominant. It's a bit taller, it's more impressive, and so you see this new construction and you're like, yeah, that's new construction, but wow, there's the Polar building. And that focal point was the whole point of the overlay district. So staff looked at the distance of those properties that could still have some development, and took the development at 8th and Pennsylvania as a sample and said, okay, what if we don't tie height to a use, which is not typical for design guidelines? What if we tie it to the size of the lot? And if the lot is bigger, it can be taller, and we know by the building that's already there that height is acceptable to most people. So let's use that as our datum and say, okay, if you have a large lot, you can increase to those 4 stories or up to that additional height of 48 feet. And so the Historic Resources Commission looked at this language and had a great deal of discussion, and their conclusion was, even though the original guidelines were written this way, and that's the way our downtown plan is written, they didn't really think stories of a building should have anything to do with it, because ultimately it's the height that matters, and if you can get 6 stories in the same height building that you can get 5 stories in, who cares? You know, it's the height that's the issue. So they requested to remove all of the references to stories in the proposed language. They also had a discussion about including that the height of the parapet would be at that maximum 48 feet, so that you wouldn't have a 48-foot tall building with another 10-foot parapet, because then you're at the height of the Polar building again. Then when it came to density, the study that we did was similar to what we did for height, and looked at the existing land development code, what the intent was when the overlay district was done, and was there a sweet spot where we're still meeting the type of density that we envisioned as a community for this area? Could we increase the density a little bit without harming the character of the area? And did density truly need to be in design guidelines when it's more of a use function than an architectural function? And design guidelines are typically more towards your architectural functions, you know, building materials, height, setback, those good kind of things. And so really for design guidelines, does it matter how many people live in a building or on a lot if the building is compatible with the rest of the district? And so after some discussion, we looked at the zoning districts and what the base zoning districts would allow in this overlay right now. The Polar building is actually zoned R4. It transferred to R4. So it does not meet the density cap for the R4 district. When we looked at the properties that were M3, which is most of the red that you see here on the screen, if 25% of the project is non-residential, then basically you really don't have a density cap, so you can build fairly dense. And so the residential that we have at that corner of 8th and Pennsylvania and then above Lawrence Beer Company, we did the calculations on those, and those both meet for that basic, that underlying zoning district, they would meet that density. And then we went back to the intent and the notes of what the overlay was trying to achieve, and they wanted to keep some of that industrial feel. They wanted it to be high density, but not too high, and then they wanted the commercial. And so we do have IL and IG in the overlay district that don't allow residential. And so when we put it all on the map and we're looking at the different areas, if we use the base zoning district instead of adding a layer in the guidelines, everything that's there except for the Polar building would meet the land development code. And it would also meet the intent of what the overlay district was initially set out to do. So staff, after looking at all this, made sure that we weren't going to make anybody non-conforming. And like I mentioned, the only one that doesn't work is the Polar building because it's not mixed use, so it's straight residential, and it has about 87.4 units per acre, dwelling units per acre. So they, in order, if we went totally back to the base districts, they would have to rezone to R5 to be able to get that kind of density. When the HRC looked at the zoning, they concurred with staff's findings that really density just doesn't need to be a part of this overlay conversation and the design guidelines. Now that we have this great new land development code, let's use it. It's got the base districts, it's built for this, except for the Polar building. So maybe we keep the Polar building density in the guidelines since they're specifically written to protect the Polar building, and everybody else just goes back to their base zoning district. So the Planning Commission has a couple of roles. The first one is that you get to look at the proposed changes to the design guidelines for planning and zoning implications. And then with that, you have to consider Plan 2040 and the East Lawrence Revitalization Plan and the Land Development Code to see if what we're proposing, either from the applicant or staff or the HRC, works with the intent of those documents and the goals of those documents. And then finally, you have to look at this as a text amendment and see if it meets one of those criteria in the Land Development Code for a text amendment. So when you look at conformance with the comprehensive plan, I have on the screen the big statement from page 46 and 2040. We all know how unique our neighborhoods are, and it's a really big part of unmistakable Lawrence, and we want to encourage that and even create new neighborhoods that have that same kind of feel. I'm not going to go through all of these because I could talk on every one of them about 20 minutes. But again, in 24, we have those goals in Chapter 4 about residential. Chapter 7 is about historic resources and how to protect those with adaptive reuse and those types of things. And in the East Lawrence Revitalization Plan, you see those same things. The goal is to protect the historic character of the neighborhood. As far as the criteria for your decision-making on whether or not this is an appropriate text amendment, staff is of the opinion that it does meet that second proposition, that it does address a specific development issue, because as a community, we've said affordable housing is important to us. We're looking for lots where we can do that. This is a vacant lot. You know, we want to encourage that. And so it really is trying to make a modification to achieve a larger community goal. You did have one communication in your packet that was posted with the packet, and I had the opportunity to email with the gentleman, and I think I answered all his questions, but am certainly happy to go over any of those questions with you if you have the same questions. And then, so finally, at the end of the day, I don't expect you to be able to read this on the screen, but the staff recommendation is exactly what's in your packet, with the exception of taking out the 3 stories in the height section, and then at the very end adding that the 48 feet includes the parapet. Those are the only 2 changes. And then for the density, staff is proposing that we get rid of all the language about the special projects and all these requirements that you have to meet if you want to go above the density. Go back to the base zoning, except for the Polar building. And with that, I am recommending that you forward a recommendation of approval to the City Commission for the revised language in the design guidelines, and approval for the proposed amendment that would incorporate those changes into the land development code. And with that, I'd be happy to stand for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Lynn. At this point, we would normally hear from the applicant and go into public comment, and then if we have any questions for you, we'll come back. I do have one question for you, though. It doesn't state who the applicant is, or at least I couldn't see it. And so I was just curious as to whether or not there was an applicant, or if the Historical Resources Committee is the applicant, or what the situation is.
No, the applicant is actually Patrick Watkins, working with Tony Kresnick on the affordable housing project at that location.
Okay, so then I will turn to see if they're here tonight. Thank you very much. So is the applicant here? I do believe I see them. All right. We can barely hear you if you.
Oh, can you? I didn't say anything yet. How are you guys doing?
Oh, well, now we can hear you loud and clear. There was something else going on, but we can now hear you very well. Thank you.
No worries. I'm happy to answer any questions or give any comments where needed.
Perfect. Thank you very much. We'll turn to public comment, and if we have any questions for you, we'll ask.
Thank you.
At this time, we'll take public comment on this item. Is there anyone here to speak on this item tonight?
Before I begin, may I pull up the agenda item? Is that allowed?
The agenda?
Yes. Oh. Just this one. Yeah. that one.
Let me share it, and then you're up. Okay, you're driving the bus.
Great, thank you, Kurt. Samuel Carter, 66046. Kind of wild. So I think we probably first met about maybe a year and a half ago. I was coming to talk about parking requirements, right? Since then, part of that, I've just done a deep dive in the history of parking requirements in Lawrence. It is totally fascinating. Learned a lot of really interesting stuff. And during the courses, I also learned a lot of stuff that just hasn't been talked about that is really important. I think some people have been talking about these things publicly, but not many and not enough. And I'm not necessarily going to talk about it all today. A lot of it is like really hard and it's complicated, and I want to tell the story right, you know. But this is kind of related to it. So I've been watching, you know, Historic Resources Commission, and I don't know, have any of y'all been to an HRC meeting before? I'd encourage you to do it, to watch them. It is really interesting. And sometimes it's kind of wild. I mean, sometimes things are said that I'm surprised someone would say in public, but it's said. You know, it's good for me to hear also what's all. But anyway, so I saw this, and there were just this agenda item, and there's some things that were curious to me. Like I think the first page it says, for future development to support the intent of the design guidelines for the overlay district, the current height restriction should be maintained. I didn't quite understand what was really being asked by staff here. So I sent the email a little late. The staff was gracious, sent it to y'all. I asked them not to, but they did they did anyway, which, you know, it is what it is. Well, so I get to the meeting on Thursday. Staff gives their presentation, applicant comes up, and I just want this affordable housing to happen, right? That's one of the big things. Applicant comes up and was like, we agree with everything staff is saying, right? So I'm like, oh, you know, I kind of wish I had known that, but that's okay. But then I noticed in the actual guidelines themselves that there's something else that was very curious, which is on page 14, not 13, but on page 14 of the guidelines, page 33 hold on a second, page 14 of the guidelines. Oh yeah, is parking, and it just incorporates parking requirements from 1966, and that connects to Harlan Bartholomew, who's a proponent of that. I don't have enough time to go through the whole story, so I'm actually gonna cut to the chase. And I do have one request, one suggestion for the language. I would actually remove for building height, the proposed language. I would actually remove discretion and, authority and, because they already have the discretion. We don't want to accidentally kind of launder authority when that authority hasn't been given. So that's my questions. Talk about all this stuff all night. Just, you know, feel free to reach out. Thank you.
And you can always come to general public comment and give us a parking lecture.
All right, yeah, thanks.
All right. With that, we'll turn back to the applicant. Does the applicant have?
Sorry, Chair, I think we have more.
Sorry. Do we have more? We do. We have more public comment.
Oh, hello, Chair. Thank you. I think it's fair for me to bring up what I'm about to bring up based on, thank you, the multiple times that staff brought up housing. And that is that these buildings are increasingly housing Airbnbs, short-term rentals, which is the antithesis of housing, actually. And while there are multiple ways we need to address this with City Commission, and this is obviously not on you at this time with this question, it is important for you all to be aware of the extent to which these are happening in the buildings that you've referenced this evening, including the Polar Lofts, 1010. This is one that is located in the newest building for 55 and over people. This is verified Airbnb in that brand new building, which was created from every incentive we have available, not actually housing people, but in fact being a de facto hotel. I am fully aware that what I'm saying you have no control over tonight, but think hard about the changes you are making or will make with text amendments and the way we can sometimes shoot ourselves in the foot, particularly with short-term rentals. There were a lot of other keywords that staff used that, again, is about housing, affordable housing, and in this case, even workforce housing in our community being used for short-term rentals rather than actual housing. And considering the amount of money and energy you all and many other boards are spending trying to supply that, allowing these to continue, in essence, taking housing off our market is unaccountable and undoing literally all the work we do all day, every day. So again, this is verified in the 1010, I think is the address there. I know there have been ones in the Polar Lofts. Other city commissioners have called that out. So when we give these kinds of changes to builders, developers, realtors, whoever, be aware of whether it is actually providing housing, which we've all expressed a need for, and ask yourselves whether you're giving a backdoor to something that will not provide what we need. Thank you.
Is there any other public comment? Is no one else here in the room? Is there anyone online?
I don't see any.
Okay, at this point, we'll turn back for the applicant if there's any response to any of the public comment.
It never ceases to amaze me when people can get up and spread half-truths or mistruths without any repercussions, which is super frustrating. But what was just referred to are the live-work units. And the live-work commercial units, as everybody on this board knows, everybody on the city commission knows, have always been designed for commercial space. Again, spaces you can live at, spaces you can work at, spaces you can do a combination thereof. And in the case of New Hampshire Lofts, the first floor, thank goodness that somebody did come along and lease all of them. And obviously, I think that we can all agree that we hope that they're very successful in their pursuit of Airbnbs, because yes, we have a housing pandemic in Lawrence, Kansas. We also have a huge shortage of hotel rooms and short-term rental spaces over the years, as you can imagine.
I'll have to ask you to make sure you're addressing like this particular project, if you know.
Right,
just be careful. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. No. I am.
Thank you.
So same with New Hampshire Lofts. Same with Penn Street Lofts. Same with the market rate unit. I think specifically there is one in the district. The first floor of Ninedale Lofts Phase 2 does have 6 live-work units. And I don't know if there's going to be somebody that's interested in having an Airbnb there. I sure hope that there is. I don't know if somebody's going to be interested in having, a Lawrence Wine and Cheese Academy, as Lynn referenced before. I sure hope that there is. Might be Win and Wally's Ice Cream Shop. It might be a law firm. I don't know. But the upper levels, and by the way, all of that's passed by the city commission already, right? There's always been 36 apartments up above. Those 36 apartments cannot be commercial space. They cannot be Airbnb space. And that's what we have here. So we have, again, 6 live-work units, extremely flexible on the first floor. And then we have the 36 apartments up above, a combination of affordable housing as well as a small amount of market rate housing. So hopefully that clears up the narrative that you just heard a few minutes ago. In regards to the other comment, I believe that he was supportive of the project. He did bring up parking. I will say that Lynn was right. The new building code that has now been adopted has gone a long way in helping streamline, frankly, outdated elements of the code, one of which is parking. And I can tell you this, if anybody is driven by Penn Street Lofts, any given point in time, that parking lot is 50% occupied. Well, what does that mean? Well, what that means is that we had to build parking that we didn't need, and really we lost affordable housing that we could have had. So in this case, I agree with the person that made the comment. I also agree with Lynn in regards to the new building code helping this out, because we are traditionally, we are over parking our housing communities, especially affordable housing communities, in a day and age with technology that dependence on cars is becoming less and less traditional. So anyway, hopefully that clears up.
Yes, thank you. And if we have any questions, we'll be sure to come back to you. So at this time, then I'll bring it back to the commission for discussion. Or any questions of the applicant or staff.
I have a question for Lynn. Lynn, I'm sure I misunderstood, but I thought what you told me was that the easiest way to deal with the Polar building is just make it R5.
Well, they would have to go through a rezoning application to do that. So the easiest way right now, the design guidelines have already been amended to allow the density that they have at the Polar building. So we can just leave that in the design guidelines. That way they're non-conforming. They don't have to pay. They don't have to go through the rezoning process. They can do what they're doing right now because it's already in the guidelines.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate that clarification.
Other discussion? Comment?
Sure. Anybody?
Hop in.
So as I read through the application, I'm not sure, I think I want to hear from the developer and I want to hear from staff. Let's make a statement to start with. The guidelines are, guidelines, not code, but guidelines, say that any building in that area needs to be lower than the height of the Polar building. Don't necessarily, understand that logic, but it is what it is. So we just accept it face value. But when an applicant brings a project and they say, I want to be at 52 feet, my math says that's lower than the Polar building. But for some reason, we're what feels kind of arbitrary saying, well, we don't feel that that's low enough. We feel that the look of it might be different, but to me, that's super subjective, super arbitrary. So I guess the two questions I have, one for the developer is, do you agree that this 48-foot restriction, based on the look of it, is workable for the project that you brought forward that kind of started this whole thing in motion? And then second, I want to ask staff, maybe why, outside of the look of it, I heard the words, but outside of the look of it, why are we going away from what the guidelines say are required? Could I maybe start with Tony or
Sure.
or Pat?
Is that Commissioner Rexroad?
Yes.
Speaking?
Yes.
Yeah, I can't really answer that question, and I don't know where that came from. When I saw that, we kind of joked around internally. We should have started off by asking for just a foot shorter than the Polar building, and then they could have knocked us down to the 52 feet that the architect and the engineers believed that we needed to have. What I can tell you is what I was told is that was based upon Penn Street lofts, and that it was believed that was achieved at 48 or 49 feet. As you can imagine, Commissioner, I don't want to build a 52-foot building if I can get away with building a 48, 49-foot building. But I can tell you that there are some areas inside of Penn Street lofts where there was some soffits that were created and, drop down areas. And so I think that the goal here was to just provide a nicer living experience for the tenants, and that we needed to go up to 52 feet. I also was out of town last week, so I was unable to join. It's my understanding that HRC did not work with the architect or engineer on this to figure out how to go from 52 to 48. Is 48 possible? Yeah, we can build 36 apartments up above 6 live-work units at 48 feet or less. Is that best practice? Is that going to be what's best for the tenants? The architect and engineers didn't think so. And so, if we get into this situation and feel that there's a huge compromise that needs to take place that is going to be severely damaging to the tenants, then we'll just need to come back to this body and explain the matter a little bit further, I guess.
Okay. Thank you. Lynn, are you speaking for staff on this?
Yes, I will. When we were looking at height, and height can feel subjective sometimes, but when you're out in the field and you're looking at a district as a whole, and you're looking at one building to try to keep it as the icon, and then surrounding this entire area to the east is a residential neighborhood that the buildings are usually at max at 2 stories. And then also to the south of this district, also 2-story structures are the maximum. So you're looking at what is compatible, how high can we go and still make the Polar building the focal point? Because that was the intent of the whole district and of the design guidelines based on all that community input that we did. When the structure got the increase in height at 8th and Penn, the HRC members went out and looked, staff has been out and looked, taken different sight lines from different places, and then also taking sight lines for the proposal that's before us now, and said, okay, when you get within 1 or 2 feet of that building, visually, there's just no difference. And even though 10 feet doesn't sound like a huge difference, when you're 10 feet and over 200 feet away, there is a visual perception, this building is taller than this building. So if the goal is to have this building taller, then how high can you go and still achieve that? We know we've done that at 8th and Penn, so we took that as the model and said, okay, let's stick to this model. It's here, it's working, and that seems like a good compromise. We looked at the proposed structure, how it was designed, floor to ceiling heights, parapets, how the rooms were laid out and everything. And it is the opinion of staff and the architects on the HRC that this building can be designed like the one at 8th and Pennsylvania, meet the needs of the building to maintain the number of units that they need to maintain with decent floor to ceiling heights and still be lower than that.
You disagree with the applicants, architects, and engineers?
I do.
Do you? All right.
I mean, we've already built it. Same.
You've built it. Other developers?
Other developers have. I mean, the city has approved and the developer has built a structure at this limitation with the units and with them being nice units.
You've talked a couple of times about how the community came together and made these decisions about what it should look like. You're talking about the 2006 effort?
Yes.
That's 20 years ago now. And just a comment, kind of almost editorial here, that as you described the success in that area, which, by the way, is just fantastic for our community, right? It seems to me that every time we've gotten out of a developer's way, when they've brought something to us that is an idea of something that they can make happen, they can make viable, they can make work, that area has flourished. And I just got to say, I really struggle with the idea that we're going to use an arbitrary approach to just say, well, I just don't like the look of that. It just, to my eye, it doesn't look different enough. And have that be a reason that we add more cost and more time and layers onto this project. So,
I don't think it's going to add more cost or more layers simply because The redesign to shorten the floor-to-ceiling heights, there is a design cost with that, but then you also make up that cost in building materials and building construction. So there's not a huge increase in price. And then, although that was in 2006 when we did that, we have been working with the East Lawrence neighborhood over the past 2 years with a new East Lawrence plan. And that is still a very important part of that neighborhood, and their concerns is the dominance of the Polar building.
Yeah, and I understand that. And the Polar Building is a great feature in our community. I love that place. I think what the developers have done there has just been fantastic. And I support it. I absolutely support it, and I support making an amendment here tonight so that we can continue that great work. I do, though, struggle with this height limitation. And I guess, so another question I want to ask is, and I'm not sure I'm asking you or if I'm asking staff here, but what are our options tonight? I know that we have in front of us this amendment and recommendation, but is it an option for us to make a recommendation to approve, but with a different building height?
You can approve the applicant's request. You can approve staff's request that was revised based on the Historic Resources Commission wording that they thought was appropriate, or you can come up with your own wording that you think is appropriate, because all of this is just a recommendation to the City Commission. Ultimately, they will look at your recommendation, the Historic Resources recommendation, and they're the ones that get to make the yay or nay.
Yeah, I struggle with some of these things, including thinking that it's okay for affordable housing to be somewhat less than any other building we might build somewhere.
Well, and I think it'll be real nice, you saw the picture on there, and then we had some of these height restrictions with the one that's on 11th in New Hampshire as well, and then the one that's at 8th in Pennsylvania that's super popular, had those restrictions too. And then it's important to note that in other places in the district, projects have redeveloped and developed, and they're very positive and very great, and they use the guidelines. They didn't have to exceed them. And one of the examples is Lawrence Beer Company. They actually added 2 stories to that building, but they maintained underneath the height and the maximum stories in it, and it worked for them, and it's turned out to be a great project.
And this would, just thinking about that, I mean, just with the comment about affordable housing, I mean, this would apply to anything that's being built under there. So it's not just like an affordable housing building and we're asking for shorter ceilings. It would be a design for anything going forward.
Understood.
Yep.
Yeah.
Understood.
So
The thing that's in front of us now is that, and we're saying that, yeah, we can just make them shorter, I guess.
well,
I struggle with it a little bit.
no, I hear you. I see you. I had a
Chelsea,
yes. Someone online.
I hate to be compared to the Grinch that stole Christmas, but it appears that the Polar building, from 20 years ago, it was decided nothing could be taller than that. Is that really a guideline that applies today with all the changes that have gone on in Lawrence in the last 20 years? What Commissioner Rexroad said, I would be interested in hearing other developers comment, and I know there's only one developer here tonight, but to say, what if? What could we do in development in this wonderful region if we could develop higher than the Polar building? If we could do something that is unique, but we're limited. Now, I'm no engineer. When I hear 48 feet is great, you can get everything you want in 48 feet. Well, what would happen if you had 60 feet or 65 feet? What possibilities are being limited when we take the Polar building as the tail that wags the dog for this area?
Charlie, Is that, I very much appreciate your comment. Is that a comment, or do you have a specific question? Are you wanting a response from staff? Are you wanting a response from the applicant themselves who is online? Can you give me some direction with your comment?
I think it is more an expression of, we talk all the time about affordable housing, and I know more will be built in this district than just affordable housing, but are we limiting what can be done? So it is more of an expression, I think, of my perhaps not understanding that the Polar building is the be-all, end-all of development. It is a wonderful building. It has never been legally in compliance with any zoning that it's in. So we had to make a special exception for that 20 years ago. I guess I don't feel hidebound in my own thinking to say 20 years ago, and I looked at all of the plans, development that they went through, and my goodness, it was extensive for this area. But does it really apply today? Lawrence has lost population, apparently. Well, I don't know why.
Okay.
So I guess it is more of an expression of my frustration rather than I am asking a question.
Wonderful. Thank you for the clarification. Commissioner Eldridge?
I wanted to say thank you to Lynn and thank you to the staff report, because even though this started 20 years ago, development and planning in East Lawrence has been an ongoing thing since before 1970 when I first moved to Lawrence. And I think that what the staff has done in terms of working with the community and engaging the community and getting a buy-in and a sense of trust and a sense of reliability is terribly important. And the fact that the other buildings that have been built have also been subject to these limitations in height. This isn't something new that is just for this particular building. This is something that is totally consistent with the years of development and the years of balancing housing and historic content and trying to make it all work in a way that is not only compatible, but joyful and special and unique about Lawrence. And I don't think we're just another community that can keep on building higher, wider, faster anywhere we want to. I think we need to be cognizant of what has gone before. And I think we need to be respectful of that.
And if I may, Chair, one of the things, the reason we have the height limitation in this district is, if you recall, I mentioned that Zone 1 is a National Register of Historic Places district, and we have a state preservation law in the state of Kansas that looks at any development building permits, demolition permits, leases, license, for anything within that historic district. And you have to use the Secretary of the Interior standards, which are incorporated into these guidelines for Zone 1. And one of the things that it talks about is height, and how important height is to be compatible and maintained. And if you're trying, if you're doing an addition or you're doing new construction, it should be subordinate to the primary historic structure. So the National Register of Historic Places for that district really does come into play as well.
Thank you. And I had a question about the 58 inches, and you may have addressed this, and I might just not have grasped it quite yet. But when you were talking with Commissioner Rexroad, you were talking about that we had a building that was at the 48, and we know 48 works. Was there any look at, if we go higher than 48, what does that do? I know that we wouldn't actually have a built building higher than 48, but was there any kind of architectural or did any of your engineers look at what would maybe be the effect of going to 58? Was that looked at?
Yes,
or?
we did, kind of similar to those drawings I showed on that one side. We did kind of streetscapes that show the comparison of the building. And then you can go out on site and if you have that section, you can try to, imagine. We didn't actually, a lot of times we'll have people go up with flags and actually flag it and take photos. But with this one, we had the sections and went out and said, okay, where is that sweet spot? So we can get as much as we can get, but still meet the Secretary of the Interior standards and therefore the design guidelines.
Okay, so your architects who are approving this did actually look at what they thought would happen if it went as far as 58?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I think it's 52.
Oh, 52. Sorry. Thank you. It's important. That's important. It's probably, as someone who's a little bit taller, I want those extra inches. I appreciate that.
I know it's kind of like your child saying, I'm 5'7.5".
Right, right. Exactly.
Well, and that's a clarifying point I had. In 2011 and 2020, what were the major amendments to the overlay at that point?
They were both for density and height based on affordable housing, and that is the density and the height that we're now proposing for the rest of the district. Take away the density, but the height would be the same as what works at 8th and Pennsylvania.
So in essence, this will be the third time a major concern has come up over the polar building being the anchor for this district, right?
Correct.
And so we're arguing, if you will, over a 4-foot difference from 52 to 55, right? Or 3 foot. I can do math. We're discussing that over a 220-foot distance from the polar building. And the concern is that the average person who goes to enjoy that area is going to think, oh no, these apartment buildings are 3 foot taller.
It has more to do with the overall height and mass, and that building being more dominant in the district than the polar building. So the taller you get and the more massive your block, as it were, where the building gets, the more dominant it has in that context area.
Can I ask a question tangential to that?
Yeah, sure.
Is the idea of the distance from the polar building and the lot size that's in this recommendation, is that new language?
That is new language, and the reason behind that is as you move forward further away from a structure when you're comparing height, just because of the way your eye lines up height,
I understand.
it will seem shorter.
I didn't register with me until right now that that's additional new restriction that we're being asked to place in the guidelines.
And the reason is if you look at some of the smaller lots that might develop, for them to actually achieve those heights would be very difficult just construction wise.
That'd be a decision for the developer, though, wouldn't it? Mm-hmm. Should we try to restrict or tell someone what they could or couldn't build?
Well, we do that with zoning every day.
Yeah, but we're talking about adding that restriction in this amendment. So
Correct.
I don't want that to be lost.
Just off that, the adding, so what would be adding in, the one you were just speaking of, that would be because of height? I mean, that would be in order, the concern there is still the height. The concern there is still the mass. The concern there is still making sure that consistent with the plans, which I want to say thank you very much for pointing out. You had all of the plans we're supposed to consider listed, and that was really, I loved seeing the East Lawrence revitalization plan in there. And thank you for calling all those out specifically. But this new one would be in order to stick with those plans, right?
Yes.
So yes, it would be a new restriction, but the restriction is still for the same reason. Is there a reason that it wasn't in there before? Is there a reason why it needs to be added now? What was,
Well, originally, the restriction was 3 stories and 40 feet. So when we started adding things like that new restriction to be 220 feet away, it was to allow for greater height, but not impact the focal point of the district.
okay, so it's being added now because the other changes that we have made will kind of begin to encroach upon the focal point, and so we're adding this to still be consistent with the plans and with the community's desire for the polar lofts to still be the focal point.
Correct. It's kind of a mitigation, if you think about it, because if you're that far away from the polar, it's going to still be that focal point. And so if you're taller than like the original 40 feet, that's not as impactful if you're further away. Whereas if you're right next door and you're the same height or taller, then that will definitely have an impact on the focal point of the polar building.
So that's really not a restriction. It really is allowing for greater height than would have been provided previously.
Correct.
And it's all to keep it within a context. And if we wanted to change it and have it go 60 feet, it seems to me that the staff and the neighborhood and the developers would have to go through all the engagement like they have done earlier to understand what this whole plan is and how perhaps it should change now over time. And I think that's true, that things change over time, and that's why we have plans. But I don't know that we want to stop this project from proceeding in order to engage in a multi-year plan for this whole neighborhood. I think
very
this,
much agree with your last comment. We don't want to stop this, but I'd argue that what the applicant has requested is inside the guidelines. That's my whole point. What they've asked for is in the guidelines. And the response to this is to say, we're going to add several new restrictions, new language. It doesn't apply just to this, but to everything else that might happen there. And I think back to every single thing that's happened that's caused this district to be important to Lawrence has been when we've gotten out of the way, when we've enabled those different things to happen.
it's all been part of a wonderful community work, and I don't think you can.
But it doesn't ignore the community's work. It's inside the community's work.
It needs to stay
The guideline
that
says
way.
nothing higher than the polar building.
And that has all been part of the community
Right,
work.
that's 55 feet,
Yep.
10 inches. Applicant's request is for 52 feet. I understand that the look of it, from, arbitrarily, depending on your perspective, might be as big as, but certainly not taller than.
And I would certainly applaud the staff for doing what they have done and using the same precedents that they have used previously.
And just to be clear, Commissioner Rexroad, the current language is 4 stories and 40 feet. No, 3 stories and 40 feet. So what they're proposing does not meet the current standard.
Understood, and if I said that badly, I apologize for that, but with the recommendation of staff is to raise this, to allow 4 stories. The guideline says lower than 55-10. 52 meets that criteria. So that's just where I am. I'm not trying to argue with you. That's just where I am on it. So.
And not to put another plug in for the East Lawrence neighborhood, but we have been working with them on a new plan for the last couple of years. We've tabled at Farmers Market. We've had lots of public meetings. We're rebooting that plan right now with lots of public engagement. We did a survey, have great response to the survey. So we are working on that neighborhood plan, and this is one of the areas that's discussed in that neighborhood plan. So when you see that plan come before you, it may have something totally different. The feedback mostly that we got was everybody likes the way it is. But, when you start doing analysis and other public hearings, we don't know what that plan is going to say, but it is in process. And basically what we're doing right now is to help move this project through while we finish the plan and maybe reevaluate.
So are you saying that we should wait for this new plan to come forward before we do anything?
Absolutely not,
All right,
because
just wanna make
this,
sure.
this project has deadlines
Yes.
that it has to meet for the tax credits.
Very
and
good.
the
Just
city
wanted to
funding.
make sure that
Yeah.
that was clear. All right.
Chelsea?
Yes,
Not so much questions, but comments.
yes.
And I know we've done this in the past. We've also not done it in the past where we've rewritten something on the basis of a single project. That kind of is what this feels like, and what we just heard, we're going to be doing it again. When the next project comes down the line, or when this next version of the neighborhood plan comes, we're going to be talking about the exact same thing again. Just my editorial comment. And I'm not against, certainly not against this project. It's a great sounding project, and we need it to move forward. We need the housing. But to deny, and we're not in this case, something because of a perceived view of whether it's taller or too tall or not, it's very subjective, as Gary said.
I have a question for staff of that perceived. Everyone keeps kind of talking about it's really subjective, and there's this perceived knowledge and all of that. And this is well out of my wheelhouse. But it's my understanding that you had that this is a thing that happens around the country, and that there are preservation districts and there are height restrictions kind of everywhere. And I think we see this in a lot of some of those places around the world where we love to go visit. They have preserved something like this pillar, and they've done it through height restrictions and things like that. And as a part of that, then I'm assuming that there is a method for evaluating what that would end up looking like, and that you had experts, your architects, do those evaluations, and that they weren't really subjective, like they went out there and were like, well, that looks higher than that, and that would probably be like that, but that there is like an actual scientific process. Now we can all maybe disagree on what we think would be too big or not. But if you could just kind of clarify a little bit for me, I'm just a simpleton, how that...
You know, the Planning Commission doesn't get to deal with my subjective world of historic preservation very often. And some of the guidelines can be very subjective because they're meant and designed to be flexible, because no historic area is the same. That's the great thing about our historic districts across the United States. You know, very seldom will you find two that are exactly the same. And so the purpose of the Secretary of the Interior's guidelines is to say, okay, what do we have here? What is character defining? What do we need to protect? Not to stop development, but to have development that doesn't impact the character of the historic district, and at the same time allows us to move forward. And so, for example, in downtown, we just did a new downtown plan, and we had a professional consultant come in, and previously the height for downtown in the zoning code was 90 feet, and it still is. But there's a little asterisk that says it has to meet the downtown design guidelines. And so what the consultant was finding is that it's okay to have 4 to 5 stories here, but it's not okay to have 4 to 5 stories here, because they're two different locations and they have different contexts. And so we have trained a Historic Resources Commission on how to interpret the standards. They have to look at the context, they have to look at the purpose of the historic district, and then they have to apply those national standards to evaluate. There's not a specific formula. If your building is 50 feet, compatibility is at 42, because depending on the context, it may be 30, or it may be an equivalent height. And so it is subjective, and that's part of the historic preservation or historic resources protection world. And that's why, when we have in chapter 22, which is our historic resources chapter, when it talks about new construction, it says, it may be between this, and it depends on what the purpose is. And so for this National Register district, and ultimately for the overlay, the purpose was for the Polar building to be the tallest and to be the focal point. So when the HRC had to look at, okay, what height can it be, they did look at that. They did look at, can you build a 3-story building at what height? What's the engineering? How does that work? Can you build a 4-story building? Can you build a 5-story building? And at what point do you start encroaching on, which is one of the preservation terms, the historic integrity of the context of that important property?
So are you saying that you keep talking about it in context? I understand that it might look different here than over here, but are you saying, what I'm trying to figure out is who decides in the context? So if we've decided this is the context, right, and we're trying, and this would work here but not work over here, but we're over here in this context, and when we're deciding if this is massive or not, are you telling me it's completely subjective, or are you telling me that there's architects who are able to figure out whether or not it would encroach, to use that word, or is it really just lay people going out and looking to see if it would encroach? I think it's really, based on my conversation or what I'm hearing here, is really important to me anyway for my process, is to understand in that context, did someone with expertise make that decision, or was that something that is really truly subjective? Because it does matter for me anyway, for a project like this.
Sure, and it's not just the architects. They do make that evaluation, and they talk about floor to ceiling heights and what you can achieve in different heights and what that would look like.
But that'd be internal, right? All that would be internal. So I'm just kind of like the external portion, because it's my understanding that the guidelines are trying to get at this massiveness, not encroaching upon the polar lofts. So yeah, someone has to figure out what can be done as far as 5'5" doesn't hit their head on the ceiling, but externally, for it to be, how massive is it? When we're making that decision, what is the expertise or the scientific process? Is somebody with expertise and scientific process making that determination?
Yes. To be on the Historic Resources Commission, you have to do very significant training. And the training comes from the State Historic Preservation Office, who is trained by the National Park Service. And the National Park Service comes to Lawrence every 5 years or so to do training also. They also have to do training online and attend an official training once a year. Then I actually, to do what I do, have over 40 years experience evaluating these things. I've been trained by the National Trust for Historic Preservation, by the National Park Service. I meet their qualifications. And so you have lots of people with lots of expertise looking at this. And then in addition, for this one, we actually did contact the State Historic Preservation Office, who also has a staff that is trained by the National Park Service to weigh in on the impacts to the historic district, because it is a state law review. We get to do those on the local level. The Historic Resources Commission does them, but to do that, they have to be trained. So it's not just, I picked Joe off the corner, he's on the commission, he's like, yeah, it looks all right to me. There's a lot of training.
Thank you. It just, when you're talking about what's subjective and what's not, it looks like Commissioner Munch.
Yeah, but to put a finer point on that, it's still subjective, right? You all you do have more extensive training, education, experience, more refined perspective on these matters, but you're not applying any special tools or formulas or metrics to determine that, okay, this is how you should think about sight lines, or this is how you should think about prominence, or once it crosses this line, we know that that throws things off balance. It's ultimately just a subjective view of a better trained person. Is that accurate?
It is to a point, but we also have, not only do we have the Secretary of Interior standards, which set out the guidelines that are a little bit subjective so they can be flexible. The National Park Service also puts out interpreting the standards bulletins that gives you examples on how you can do that. There's not a metric of if a building is 12 feet tall, you can only build an 11 feet. It's never that specific. It is not data driven. It is driven by guidelines.
Got it.
Thank you. I just think that was important for some of us up here. Not sure that the actual answer helps me at all, but I appreciate the conversation to get there.
It's helpful for me. I'm glad you asked.
Okay, good.
Just to kind of test where we are, we've had quite a bit of discussion. To test where we are, rather, stop short of saying I want to make a motion, but I want to throw out the idea of a motion and just see where we are on it, because it's kind of a complicated thing. You know.
Eat check.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I want to preface this by saying I am so excited that we're talking about this tonight. I'm so excited that the HRC is a part of this and bringing forward something that can help us continue the great development that's going on around the polar and that 8th and Pennsylvania area. I do, as I've shared, struggle with some of the new restrictions that are there, and want to go forward with this history that we've been developing of enabling developers to do some crazy cool things down there. So, and I want to ask staff this as well to help, if assuming some part or whole of this motion goes forward, how we word this. But the motion would be to approve the text amendment with 3 changes. One change would be to change the number 48 feet to 52 feet, reflecting the specific request of the developer. The second would be to strike the language that adds the new restriction of specific distance from the polar loft. And the third would be to strike the language about minimum lot sizes. And my thinking on those 2 items is that we let existing code guide us on what those 2 things might otherwise do. Just want to put that out there, see where people are, if that's something that people are interested in, if you like something, don't like something.
Yeah, so based on that, is there discussion, people want to weigh in on Commissioner Rexford's ideas?
The only one I had would have a concern, just want clarification on, is the lot size. I don't know if that is a historic district concern, that they're including that from a historic district perspective. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like the other R2 zones or something, where we're saying, oh, well, this lot size meets a specific density. That zone is in the level 1 or lot, whatever they call it, maybe there's a particular restriction on that lot size.
And the reason the lot size came into play is when you go back and look at the Sanborn fire insurance maps and the history for this area, the larger buildings that were taller or had a more massive footprint were all on larger lots. So we looked at the lot sizes over time that supported historically taller or larger footprint structures. So the smaller lots, many of them were 1-story, some 1.5 and 2 for the smaller lots. They never achieved the height or the massive footprint. They were never combined to do that in this district. And so that's the history of this district, and that's why that's there.
I'd like to ask a question of the developer, if I may.
Yes.
I don't think it's clear in my head as to whether you can live with the staff recommendation, but would prefer not to have what you were, the 48-foot height. You prefer to have that 52. Or are you saying that your project won't work unless you have 52 feet?
Yeah, I have to admit, I don't know myself. We haven't redesigned the building in the last week. What I can tell you is nobody would be more excited about building, a Class A property that's not compromised at 48 feet or below, for that matter, than me. But what I do know is that, we have a team of architects and engineers that have worked on projects all over the country, and they studied Penn Street lofts, they studied New Hampshire lofts, and they believe that 52 feet was the recommendation. I will also tell you that I own the polar lofts. I own and/or developed 80% of the buildings in this 2-block area. I would never do anything to hurt the polar lofts. And with that being said, even at 52 feet, we're significantly, not significantly, I think it's like 8% shorter. But you'd never be able to tell the difference between 48 and 52 feet. But with that being said, I can commit, it's pretty rhetorical really, but I can commit to this body and anybody else that if we can find a way to do something at 48 feet, 47 feet, 49 feet, that would be our goal. But mind you, it wouldn't have anything to do with me being concerned about this building looking too big compared to my other building, over 200 feet away. That wouldn't have anything to do with it. The reason I would want to do it would be to save money for the project. I can tell you that at Penn Street Lofts, I think Penn Street Lofts turned out wonderful. Runner-up National Development of the Year award from Novogradac. Like every project, there's some things that I would do different there. And one thing that I would do different there would get rid of soffits and or provide a little bit more room to get rid of PTAC units or mini split units where possible. But again, if I can do it at 48, 49 feet, I'd love to. Like, all I know is what the experts have told me that have worked all over the country, and their design's 52.
Would it be of benefit to you to defer this for a month so that you would know the answer to that question?
No, I'm sorry. I can't do that. We have a competitive application being reviewed by the state as we speak. This approval will go a long way. And I don't really know what, I appreciate all the dialogue here. The 52 is shorter than the polar, which again, I own. Love the polar building. If I can do it for 48, I'd do it. But no, we need to bring resolve to this matter. And I guess if, for whatever reason, the 48 feet is too damaging to the building, or it's a compromise, understanding that a soffit at 8.5 feet versus 9-foot clear span is obviously a compromise. Nobody would sign up for that. Then I guess I could bring it back before this body and we can, have the same conversation again.
I have a question of staff. I'm sorry.
So is it the number of feet that you were most concerned about and not so much concerned about the lot size and the relationship between the lot size and the height? Do you have a concern about that?
Are you asking me?
I'm asking you. Yes, sir.
Oh no, I don't have a concern about any of this. The design that the architects and engineers have spent, years working on, probably incurred hundreds of thousands of dollars to date. I don't have any concern about any of this. What we submitted works. And again, I don't want a taller building. A taller building's more expensive. I just want the building to function well and feel good from the inside, if that makes sense. And the information that we've spent literally years working on, they came up with 52 feet. If we can do it, a foot or two shorter or 10 feet shorter, obviously that's what I would want to do, because additional height equals additional money.
Yeah, I do appreciate that. No, I was asking about the other restrictions that Commissioner Rexroad had suggested.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I agree. I agree globally and philosophically with Commissioner Rexroad's recommendations. I can't speak for him, but I think that generally speaking, it might be a question about, I think he used the term, how do we get out of the developer's way? But another way maybe of saying that is, everybody cares about historic preservation. Obviously, there's skyscrapers built next to historic buildings all over the world. If there wouldn't be cities like Chicago and New York, et cetera, et cetera. But if I was reading into what Gary was saying, was, hey, how can we sort of streamline it not only for this project, but projects in the future? And I can give you multiple examples, but oftentimes affordable housing is lost for the sake of subjective historic preservation. If you take a look at Penn Street loss, we lost 8 housing units going from a 4-story building down to 3.5. But what Commissioner Rexroad, I apologize, is recommending is obviously something I can live with for sure.
Oh, I understand that, but those two things don't have an immediate effect on the project, which is tonight's concern. Our concern is just with the project tonight that is on the agenda.
That's a true statement, but this language, though, if we leave in the language on increasing the lot size and increasing the radius, that affects everything down the stream.
Yep.
Perhaps.
It's tagged in, well, it'll inform everything, right? It'll become a part of the guideline.
It'll maintain as much of the context as we can and we know about. I don't think it has any direct effect on this particular project.
Agreed.
And
Agreed.
so that's the only distinction I was trying to make.
Which is one more reason.
52 feet is,
Yeah.
I understand your point of view, but I want to focus on just this project that's before us tonight. We can have a philosophical discussion about plans and about codes, but I don't think that's our focus tonight.
Completely agree with you, and one more reason why I believe that those should not be a part of this language tonight, because they're not specific to this project.
Okay.
I have a question of staff. I mean, if now's a good time. Okay, so this is kind of confusing because we have a project. What we're also doing a text amendment for guidelines that is very long-term, and that we're trying to work within the plans that you so nicely pointed out to us, and a plan that you are currently working on, the community revising, and that you're hearing that they want to continue to maintain the same type of historic focal point. And so we're trying to balance all of that with getting like this, what sounds like a really excellent project built. So I'm just curious, if we were to pass the guidelines as you've proposed, and a building wanted to go higher, is that something that is just absolutely never, or is that the kind of thing where there are variances, or there are other special, I don't know what they would be called, but other special ways to go about like having one project do something outside of a general guidelines?
The way these particular guidelines are written, their escape valve would be what this applicant is doing and recommend a change to the guidelines. And when you're making your motions, staff would be appreciative because this is one of those things where that crossover with the historic review happens, and they charge for the planning commission as how does this impact the planning and zoning piece of it, more so than where the HRC was looking at how does it impact the historic piece of it. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but don't both things have to be considered? So isn't the Planning Commission charged with also considering the guidelines and the historical aspect of it? I guess I'm just, I mean, yes, that's what you looked at, and that's why, that's why I'm giving a lot of weight to your evaluation and to your recommendation, because you did do that, and the Planning Commission, though, doesn't separate itself from the Historic Preservation Committee, right? But we are to take that into consideration with the zoning part. Is that
Correct.
correct? Okay.
In 2040.
Other thoughts about, I would say that kind of where I'm at with your proposal at the moment is I kind of hate doing things like this on the fly when the Historical Resources Committee was involved in it and so much expertise, and they changed quite a bit. There was quite a bit of changing, and now we're changing some other things without having like the expertise of what would our changes on the fly actually mean for the wider area, not just for this project. I think I get a little nervous about that, particularly as it relates to the lot stuff. I get the sizing, the height, if it really is subjective. I think Commissioner Munch was a great question about, like, you're not looking at metrics, right? And so I think that matters to me a lot when we're talking about height. But I do see the mass is also a thing. And so if we start messing with both the height and the other two things you mentioned, all of a sudden now it seems like we could have taken away a lot of what the Historic Resource Committee was actually the context of that whole area with this text amendment, where it seems like they might be the better resource for figuring that out, especially in light of the state statute standards. So I think that's just where I'm at.
Can I ask a question, Chair?
I'm sorry. Yes, Prasant. I couldn't see who it was. Yes, of course, please.
Yeah. So my question is, so if we change the height to 52, it's a concern / question. You know, the developers expressed that time is of the essence and it's competitive, and with this potential, you know, I know it's hard to foresee what comes next, but would this somehow introduce some kind of conflict with HRC, requiring it to like either have them, you know, give their opinion? I just don't want to put anything, because the developer is saying that they're okay with trying the 48 feet, and if they run into any issues, they'll come back to us. And it sounds like that's a reasonable stance. It sounds like he can proceed with what we have in front of us tonight. I would hate for him and his team to have some kind of a roadblock be introduced by us because HRC disagrees with us. It's sort of a question. I don't want to add any additional, you know, that's just a question.
Is that a question of staff?
And what I can tell you is if the Historic Resources Commission staff and the Planning Commission do not all correspond with generally the same type of language, more often than not, what happens at the City Commission is they send it back for like the Historic Resources Commission to consider the impact of the Planning Commission's language. So, or they can, you know, do what they want to do and accept or massage what language they want to. But in the past, when they have conflicts between staff, the HRC, and the Planning Commission, they have sent that back for further discussion and also to involve the neighborhood in those discussions.
I'm sorry. But your recommendation tonight would be carried forward to the City Commission along with the HRC's recommendation. So they would receive both. It would not require, if your recommendation is different from HRC, it would not have to go back. It's not like a comprehensive plan amendment where we have to bounce them back and forth.
I do think, I agree, it wouldn't necessarily have to come back, but I do, if they really are on a timeline, I get a bit concerned about us doing something that then pushes it back.
Yeah. I agree with that.
The only thing I would recommend is that if we thought that accepting the applicant's height and removing the remaining so that there wouldn't be any additional cost on redeveloping or redesigning the project itself, that would be my only proposal, is maybe scratch the other two for now as it pertains to, you know, expediency.
When you say scratch it, you mean don't have it as...
Your other two items about the distance and the lot size.
Right. What I'm suggesting is that we just remove that from our recommendation.
Yeah.
They're not a part of this
Yep.
project.
Yep.
They merit their own discussion.
Yep.
To James' point, they merit their
Yep.
own discussion, their own work, own engagement. So let that stand on its own.
Yep.
And that just really simplifies it. What's
Yep.
our opinion on height?
Yeah.
And if we agree with, if we say, let's go forward with the applicants or whatever the number is,
Yeah.
then it's absolutely the text amendment as it's presented, remove this piece, and just our opinion on height.
Yep.
Commissioner Munch.
Yeah, two different comments. One, I guess first, just with respect to considering height, I don't like to do this, but tonight I'm inclined to focus on the fact that we don't have final say, and the buck doesn't stop with us, and there's another step in the process. So I think I'd be inclined to approve the 48 feet tonight, forward that to the city commission with a strong recommendation to the developer and any other interested parties that if this isn't the right number, make that clear at the next step of the process. And city commission, please take that into account as you're considering that. We don't slow down the process in that way. We allow it to go forward, but recognize that there might need to be additional information provided. The second point, as to the amendment or the changes that Commissioner Rexroad has suggested, I guess I appreciate the comment and the intent, but I'm struggling because those changes, as presented in the staff's proposed language, don't impose any new restrictions on property. The only thing that they do is that they ensure that certain properties moving forward are going to be treated differently from the applicant's property. It's not that they're going to have any fewer rights with respect to their property than they do today.
The proposed project?
The smaller lots, the lots that are closer to the Polar building, et cetera. They're not losing, if I'm understanding this correctly, they're not losing any rights that they currently have. That they're already subject to this 40 feet, 3-story requirement. The language as presented says that that requirement, we're going to have an exception to that for these particular kinds of projects that are large and a certain distance away from the Polar building. And if you were to take away the size requirement and the distance requirement, then suddenly all of these other properties would have new rights then that they haven't sought, that nobody's commented on, et cetera. They'd be put in a more advantageous position by making the changes that you suggest.
I thought that the language specifying minimum lot sizes for a certain kind of construction was new to, we're adding that now, and the distance from a building is new, so.
It's new, but as part of an exception. The language that we're looking at is an exception to a current rule. And so if then we're providing an exception to the exception, then we're enhancing or giving additional rights and abilities to those properties, which is something new and different. That might require potentially having additional inputs and more of a process. And maybe we need to go down that path. No, as far as I know, no property owner has sought those particular rights and abilities. But if your concern is that we're imposing new restrictions on particular properties, we're not. We're not putting any additional restrictions on those properties beyond what they have today.
Yeah, Commissioner Munch, actually, I think the only thing, my reading is, what we're doing is allowing taller buildings 220 feet away. So we're actually, that's the change that we're making tonight, is we're allowing taller buildings further away. That's the one change we're making tonight. We're not taking anything away, we're actually adding something, and it's taller buildings further away.
Yes, and if we were to add the exception to the exception, then we would be saying you can have taller buildings anywhere. And that's more expansive than I think what the applicant saw it. And what philosophically, I think what we should seek to achieve with text amendments is to narrowly tailor them, to have them address the particular problem that's presented to us, rather than creating new rights or casting aside established standards or expectations.
I guess the thing I struggle with, and I think I hear you, I'm not sure I completely understand yet, but we're adding new language in this, right? More than just talking about the building height, but we're adding new language. So, and the way I read the language that we're adding, it's not about enabling more. It's about saying you can build. We've established a precedent or an exception for a taller building. We're also saying that it must be now a certain distance away. And we're going to do that for every potential project that might come forward, whether it makes sense or not. Isn't that a restriction in the future?
I would only say no, as I'm hearing Commissioner Munch explain, and I hear what you're saying, and I do agree. I remember the red circles that she had on the one where most of the development that's available are these, would be smaller lots, or they are the parking lots, right? And the other concern that she was explaining, and that I think Commissioner Munch is trying to express, is that those lots wouldn't achieve the over 40-foot height because most of them are too small for construction to exceed that. So they're leaving that 40-foot as sort of like that traditional height that was approved before, but allowing buildings that are further away on these larger lots, which I think there's only one other that's this size that could even be developed, allowing it to exceed the 40-foot up to the 48. And so there's new language, but I think they're scrubbing the underneath of it to allow for these bigger buildings on the larger lots, whereas the small lots, I mean, I can't imagine a narrow building, unless it's a cartoon, where the building is, 48 feet plus on those tinier lots, is what I guess I'm...
So if it isn't going to happen anyway, why write a rule saying...
I think it's to keep the standard of that 40-foot height from the original intent of the documentation, but allow these distances of 220 feet or whatever that was to exceed that as a perspective, right? That was, the conversation was about the anchoring of that building and perceived height, which is, the silly comment I made earlier about, like, we're discussing a 3-foot difference, right? And so I see what you're saying. I'm also in agreement with Commissioner Munch, like on a streamlining process at this point. I don't know that this affects where we're at, and if it helps the project move forward, I would like to look at language that simplifies that. Whether that be approve the staff recommendation with strong encouragement to look at the 52-foot height, or if it's to add the recommendation and the city gets to decide, okay, are we going to send it back to HRC for a 4-foot difference from 48 to 52? Or are we going to say, nope, you have to stick with 48 and stick with HRC? However they decide it. They still get to make that decision regardless. So
this time that they've heard from all sides.
Yes. Yeah.
So I guess 2 points. One, I generally agree, Commissioner Rexroad, with your perspective that, hey, why should we be making decisions as to what's feasible or what can be constructed or what have you? Let that happen by the people that are doing the projects and spending the money and making the plans. I think in a lot of contexts, I'm 100% aligned on that. Here, because of how this has come to us, we started off with a rule that it's 40 feet and 3 stories. An applicant comes to us and says, that doesn't make sense for my particular project. Here are the reasons why, and I need to have an exception to that. And we're considering that particular exception. In doing so, if I'm understanding you correctly, you're suggesting, right, let's make this an exception for everybody. And I don't know if that's, one, nobody's requested it. 2, if it's necessary. 3, people, if it is necessary or if it is desirable, people can request it in the future as they have done here. But we don't, maybe to Chair Hayden's point, that we don't necessarily, it wouldn't be prudent to blow this up at this point and create these potential
Google it, man.
that people haven't.
Their greens are lightning fast.
I think,
About that.
You're lightning fast, did you know it?
Yeah. So that's where I am. Is that I understand the point, and I think if that came before us as if there was somebody right next to the Polar building, I have a small lot and I should be able to build to 44 feet or what have you, I'd say, okay, there might be reasons for me to consider that and to say that that's appropriate, but that hasn't been part of the considerations or the discussion or the process up until this.
I hear you say you're good with a motion to approve the language as is.
I am, with the strong recommendation of, hey, everybody continue to poke at the number and see if that's the right number.
All right.
Chelsea,
Yes. Charlie?
the big word that I heard from the developer, and I hope it does not cause problems, he said, if I can build it at 48, I'm saving money. If I can build it, I can fully support this amendment as written and hope that he can still build this. And that when other projects come along, they can ask for a variance. They can pursue whatever they need to. But at this point, it seems that time is of the essence. And so I will support the amendment as written. I think this is a great project. It is needed in the city of Lawrence, so I will vote yes.
Thank you. Others online, commissioners online, do you have anything that you want to add to the discussion? I don't want to overlook you just because you're online. We're good? And I just want to double check with staff. If the building height is to be a problem for this project, for this developer, they can, I mean, not that they would want to, but the text amendment, this text amendment process is available to continue on to ask for one with even more height, right? This isn't one of those things where they have to wait a year or there's some kind of weird thing where they can't ask again, right? We don't want that to happen, but they could if necessary. Is that correct? Yes. You're nodding your head, so I'm going to assume that's correct. All right. Thank you.
Is it a vigorous yes? Sorry. I can't see. No.
That's good. We can't see you. We can't see you.
It was a lightning fast request.
Commissioner Eldridge?
I will make a motion that we recommend approval of the staff language to the City Commission for the changes to the design guidelines, 8th and Penn Neighborhood Redevelopment Zone, February 11, 2020, edition on page 13, and approval for text amendment AMDT 260013 to incorporate by reference in the Land Development Code, Section 2709 and Table 20-7-3. The UC Development Design Standards in Section 20-707I.
Is there a second?
I will second that.
All right. So there's a motion and a second. We'll bring it back for any further discussion by the committee. Commissioner Munch.
Two closing comments. One, I didn't cover this originally, but I did want to note that I appreciate staff's work in the drafting here to tie this back more to a design standard and less of a use standard, which I think is wholly appropriate for this type of guideline. So thank you for that. I think that's the right direction. Two, as stated, I encourage the applicant, developer to continue to poke at the number, do your diligence on your end to determine if 48 is the right number or if it needs to be 52. For all the discussion that we've had tonight, I agree that this is ultimately a subjective decision. Personally, I don't see a big difference between 52 and 48. So if that ends up being the appropriate number, I would be wholly supportive of that. I think there are ways for buildings to have prominence other than, having an extra additional 2 feet of height over its adjacent building. So consider that, and I hope that the City Commission continues to consider those numbers and sort through those.
If I could, I really feel like we're, how do I want to say it? I want this project to go forward. I don't want to do anything that's going to sidetrack. I understand that there's situations outside of what this group has, in front of it that require some speed and a decision. But I really feel like approving this as is does two things. One, it potentially layers additional cost on a developer because of an arbitrary opinion on what too big is. It meets the guidelines being under the height of the polar building. And I don't know what the cost is. I don't know what it costs to go back to engineering and architects and say, hey, can you please change everything and make this 4 feet shorter or 6 feet shorter? I don't know if that's just a couple clicks in AutoCAD or if I suspect it's probably more than that. But whether it's just a couple or if it's a lot, it's still cost that we're adding to the cost of housing in our community. And I really struggle with that when it's something that's arbitrary. The other thing I really struggle with is the idea that we're going to add new language. I get your point that it's not of consequence to this right now, but my sense is that if it did not have an impact, then it's not needed language. That there is an idea behind these two new elements of distance and lot size that are designed to limit what might happen next. And I am uncomfortable saying that we should just accept that because now this is part of the guideline, right? It's not, and it hasn't had discussion beyond here. We really didn't have a whole lot of discussion about it until we kind of tripped onto the idea, oh, wait, this is brand new. So I'm really struggling with that. I want this to go. I want it to get done. I suspect the vote's going to go great, but I want to make absolutely clear that as the City Commission, I hope they're watching this, the City Commission watches this, please think about the additional costs that we're asking them to make. And please think hard about adding more language that's restrictive in this area that's really, every single time we've gotten out of its way, it's done something cool. That's my thought. Thank you.
Yeah, I would agree with Commissioner Rexroad and Commissioner Munch on, just staying out of the way. I think one of the biggest things that we've struggled with is constantly, putting up roadblocks where they're not necessary. That being said, I would definitely encourage the city to, do what Commissioner Rexroad said and really look at the numbers and is it worth the cost of redevelopment, redesigning, potentially slowing down the project. And God only knows what the timelines are for any of the grants or the dollars that are going into the affordable housing portion that might be, given up because of this 4 foot, 6 foot difference or whatever it is. And so I would really encourage that as well as Commissioner Rexroad said. I think, we have had 2 other major amendments to this particular use code and overlay district. And I think it just goes to show that as times change, we need to obviously be willing to shift and maneuver with them so that we have the best results possible.
I appreciate everything that was said. I am in favor of this project. I'm looking forward to the project. But I do think it's important to think long term and to think about a few things that were kind of raised tonight. The intersection of kind of what the Planning Commission does and what the Historic Resource Commission does and what state statutes and what historical societies across the country do and what plans do and what it means to have a community plan, like an East Lawrence revitalization plan, many plans that are actually incorporated into Plan 2040. And there's a place and a space for all of it, and design guidelines are a part of that as well. And, I think going forward, it's really important that we don't get pushed into a corner or forced into kind of feeling like we have to make a choice, and when really it's just a false dichotomy. These guidelines have been out for a long time, is my understanding, and so yes, we're now here pushed against a deadline for a variety of reasons, but the height restriction is my understanding. It's been published and it's been a guideline at least since 2011. And so there's plenty of opportunity out there to kind of understand and to move forward with things in ways that don't necessarily push this discussion or this decision between two things that we want, right? I think the community has spoken in the East Lawrence Revitalization Plan that they really want a focal point to be the Polar Lofts. And it sounds like that, yes, it's an older plan. Many of our plans are older, but that's because the planning process, when you're involving the community, takes multiple years. And so therefore they last for a while and community conversations are kept up. And I loved to hear that the East Lawrence community is very much involved in and looking at this plan again and working with the Historical Resource Commission to do that. And so I feel like they have a bead, kind of have their finger on the pulse of what the East Lawrence neighborhood is looking for when they're looking at plans and projects like this. And so I just really hope going forward that the Planning Commission doesn't always think about, well, right now this project, we might stop it if we don't do X, when there's been time and there's been people make decisions and bring things forward in cost-effective ways, which is very, very, very important. We want to encourage development and cost-effective development, but we also want to respect and understand communities and the community plans, and there is always a tension between should we really tell someone what they can do with their property? And as staff mentioned in her presentation tonight, that's what planning and zoning does day after day. And so that's an important thing to keep in mind when we're thinking about how all of these things converge here in front of this dais, right? Over the years. And it's important to think about all of those things, and I appreciate all of you thinking about them. But it's not always our fault that we might be in a rush or we feel like we got ourselves in a rush. You still need to make the right decision for the community.
Well said.
Thank you. Any further discussion on this motion?
I would just say I think it's been a terrific discussion, and I think it is all about what we try to do, and I think it's important that everybody's contributing to it, commenting.
Wonderful. Right. With that, all those in favor of the pending motion, raise your hand. Any opposed?
How many yeses do you have?
Becky, how many yeses are there? We're having a difficult time seeing online.
All right, so you're still got your hand raised for those.
Yeah. Raise your hand if you're in favor.
Everybody online?
Yeah. Everybody online has their hand raised.
Okay. And all those opposed? There's the abstention coming too.
Abstain. I'll vote in favor.
Okay. Any abstentions? All right. With that, the motion passes. Thank you for a great discussion.
The young man who earlier tonight was wishing that we talked more. Dominic, wishing we were talking more about things. I hope that satisfied that too.
Yes. Dominic is probably like, I will never ask for that again. All right. And then there's consideration of any other business to come before the commission. We don't have any.
There is one other item.
There is. A little less than 3 years ago, I had the pleasure of joining the Planning Commission, and at that time, I had the pleasure of meeting Chelsea Hayden. I knew that she was very smart and very able because she'd been a faculty member at the KU Law School. She had been Shook, Hardy & Bacon, that most of you know is a pretty well-known law firm in Kansas City, and dummies don't get to work there. You have to be really smart to work there. And that she's a professor at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. During the time since then, I've also learned about her leadership role. She's used her legal skills not only on the Planning Commission, but with Women's Transitional Care, with the Land Trust Organization, and with her community things in places where she lives, such as Grant Township. We have been privileged to have her brain, her sense of humor, and her wonderful patience. Her leadership skills were first recognized by this commission when Commissioner Duvar invited her to be his vice chair of the Planning Commission, and the two of them joined Commissioner Rexroad with the staff at the pre-agenda meetings before every Planning Commission meeting. And then she took over as chair, and I was honored when she invited me to join her. But we have been so privileged to have her, and we're very sad that she will be leaving us after tonight's meeting. But we do want to recognize all that she has achieved, not only in the work she's done with the Land Development Code, which she worked very, very hard on and did an awful lot of research on, and chaired all of the mid-month meetings on that code when we had the consultant going with us. She worked on the wind regulations and on the solar regulations, and she has completed the first half of the work on the North Lawrence Corridor Study. But we want to recognize not only that she's been a fabulous member of the Planning Commission, which is what this certificate is.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
But, bling, bling, bling. There is
Oh, I get my
also-
gavel.
There is a gavel and a plaque and a thank you from all of us for all you have done. For the Planning Commission, for me personally, for the city of Lawrence, and for Douglas County. You've been a wonderful urban and rural voice, both on this commission. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chelsea.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all, and thank you all for your service as well.
You show up, do the work in really tough times, and I've learned from you, and I really appreciate you.
And can I also add, I can't top those most excellent words, but staff also wants to say thank you for all that you've done, your thoughtfulness, your curiosity. You've just been a great joy to have on the commission, and it's been a privilege to work with you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you all.
Chelsea, thank you for your leadership, for all you've taught me, and I honestly feel bad that I'm not there to see this in person.
Well, hopefully I will see you, and you can tell me in person another time. Yes.
All right.
Yes, it's certainly been an interesting experience. Thank you all very much. And with that, I'll look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right. Second? All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, let's go home. Thank you very much.
And there is a box.